Before clocks, before minutes, before deadlines, time still existed. It did not wait to be invented. It did not need to be named. In the lands of Anatolia and Mesopotamia, time was not measured. It was observed. This video explores how ancient societies understood time before mechanical systems, before hours were divided, before time became something counted rather than noticed. There will be no discussion of modern clocks here, no industrial schedules, no inventions that belong to a later world. Instead, this is a historical study of time as it was lived. In early civilizations, time was not a sequence of identical units. It was a pattern of change, light and darkness, growth and rest, heat and cold, presence and absence. People did not ask what time it was. They asked what time it felt like. In Anatolia and Mesopotamia, daily life unfolded within rhythms that were visible and reliable: the rising of the sun, the lengthening of shadows, the return of the seasons, the repetition of agricultural work. Time was not abstract, it was physical. Fields told people when to begin. The sky told them when to stop. The body adjusted naturally to what the land required. This understanding of time did not come from philosophy first. It came from survival. As communities shifted from mobile lives to settled agricultural societies, time began to matter in new ways. Seeds had to be planted at the right moment. Harvests could not be delayed. Weather patterns needed attention. But even then, time was not broken into hours. There were no numbers attached to the day. There was morning. There was heat. There was fading light. There was night. These were not metaphors. They were instructions. In Mesopotamia, among the river valleys of the Tigris and Euphrates, seasonal cycles shaped the entire structure of life. Flooding was expected. Dry periods were prepared for. Rituals aligned with these changes, not to control them, but to acknowledge them. In Anatolia, similar patterns appeared. Early settlements learned to read the land slowly. Time was embedded in soil, stone, and sky. This video follows that understanding. We will move through the way early agricultural societies experienced time, how the sun and moon structured awareness, how daily life functioned without hours, how sacred rituals gave time meaning beyond labor, and how night was understood not as an ending, but as a necessary pause. Throughout this exploration, the focus remains on lived experience, not theory, not abstraction. What did it mean to wake without knowing the hour, to work until the light changed, to rest without being told it was time? These questions shaped ancient life more deeply than written calendars ever could. Time in these societies was not something outside of people. It moved through them. It was felt in fatigue, in hunger, in silence, and importantly, time was shared. Communities rested together, worked together, observed together. There was no individual schedule competing with another. The day belonged to everyone equally. This collective rhythm is central to understanding ancient time. Without it, the archaeological remains appear incomplete. Temples were not only religious centers, they were time centers. Markets followed daylight. Homes adjusted to seasonal changes. Nothing existed in isolation from time, yet nothing attempted to dominate it. As we move forward, the pace of this video will remain intentionally slow. Information will be clear, but never rushed. Details will be introduced gently. This is not a lecture meant to demand attention. It is a historical narrative designed to accompany rest. You do not need to remember everything. You only need to listen. As you listen, notice how different this relationship with time feels, how unfamiliar it may seem, and how natural it once was. Before time was measured, it was trusted. Before it was counted, it was lived. We begin in the earliest agricultural societies, where time first became something people needed to understand, not to control, but to follow. For most of human history, life was defined by movement. Early human groups followed animals, seasonal plants, and changing climates. Time, in these mobile societies, was not something that needed to be tracked carefully. Movement itself created change. When food sources shifted, people shifted with them. Time passed, but it did not accumulate in one place. In this way of life, the landscape constantly changed. Camps were temporary. Paths were revisited but not fixed. Because nothing stayed long, time was experienced as flexible and open. There was little need to predict months ahead or plan far into the future. The present moment carried most of the importance. This began to change with the gradual transition to settlement. In regions like Anatolia and Mesopotamia, people started to remain in one place for longer periods. Wild grains were harvested repeatedly from the same areas. Eventually, these areas became fields. Movement slowed, presence became continuous. Staying in one place altered how time was experienced. When people returned to the same land day after day, changes became noticeable. Soil conditions shifted, plants grew and withered, weather patterns repeated. The environment began to reveal rhythms that were invisible to a constantly moving population. Settlement made time visible. When a community remained in one location, yesterday began to matter more clearly. So did tomorrow. Actions taken in one season affected outcomes in the next. This connection between past effort and future result created a new awareness of time as something extended rather than immediate. This was not yet measurement. There were no systems or numbers, but there was attention. People began to notice when the land responded and when it did not. Time was no longer something that simply happened. It became something that could be anticipated. In Anatolia, early villages reflect this shift. Repeated construction on the same sites, layered floors, and rebuilt walls show continuity. Life was no longer organized around departure, but around return. Each return carried memory, and memory required time. In Mesopotamia, the fertile river valleys encouraged similar patterns. Flood cycles and soil renewal made settlement not only possible, but advantageous. Staying in place allowed communities to learn the land's timing. With settlement, time gained weight. It was no longer carried lightly through movement. It stayed, accumulated, and demanded awareness. This marked the beginning of a new relationship between humans and time, one shaped by stability rather than motion. The shift from gathering to agriculture introduced a fundamental change. Timing became essential. In hunting and gathering societies, food availability was largely immediate. If a resource disappeared, another could be sought elsewhere. Agriculture removed this flexibility. Seeds placed in the ground created a delayed result. The outcome of work was no longer visible right away. Between effort and reward, time intervened. This delay made timing critical. Planting too early could expose seeds to cold. Planting too late could shorten the growing season. Harvesting at the wrong moment could ruin an entire yield. Survival now depended not just on labor, but on choosing the right moment. In early agricultural societies, this awareness developed gradually. There were no written instructions. Knowledge was accumulated through observation. Communities remembered which times worked and which failed. Time was learned through repetition. This learning process tied human survival closely to environmental rhythms. Rainfall patterns, temperature changes, and daylight length all became signals. These signals were not interpreted abstractly. They were experienced directly, through success or loss. In Anatolia, early farming communities relied heavily on seasonal rainfall. Dry farming required precise awareness of when the soil could support growth. Missing the proper window meant hunger later in the year. In Mesopotamia, irrigation added complexity. Managing water from rivers like the Tigris and Euphrates required attention to flooding cycles. Too much water at the wrong time could destroy crops. Too little could leave fields barren. Because of this, time became something that demanded respect. It could not be rushed. It could not be ignored. Agricultural societies learned patience not as a moral value, but as a necessity. Importantly, this timing was not measured in hours or days. It was measured in readiness. The soil was ready. The air had changed. The light felt different. These cues guided action more reliably than numbers could. Agriculture did not introduce strict schedules. It introduced sensitivity. People learned to wait, to observe, and to respond. Time was no longer passive. It actively shaped decision-making. This new relationship with time marked a turning point. Human life became tied to cycles that extended beyond immediate perception. Planning became possible, but only through careful attention. Timing, rather than speed, became the key to survival. Before written calendars, seasons structured time. Early agricultural societies organized their year around recurring environmental patterns. These patterns did not need to be counted. They needed to be recognized. Spring was associated with growth and preparation. Soil softened, rains arrived, seeds were planted. Summer brought heat and maintenance. Crops required protection. Autumn signaled harvest. Winter introduced rest and limitation. These divisions were not abstract. They were practical. Each season carried specific tasks and expectations. Knowing the season meant knowing what needed to be done. In Anatolia, seasonal variation was pronounced. Temperature shifts and rainfall patterns created clear agricultural windows. Communities learned to associate certain natural signs with seasonal transitions. Flowering plants, animal behavior, and changes in wind direction all served as indicators. In Mesopotamia, river cycles added another layer. Flood seasons defined agricultural timing. The rising and receding of water marked transitions within the year more clearly than any numerical system could. These seasonal patterns functioned as a calendar, even though nothing was written. The year was not divided into months or weeks. It was divided into phases of activity. This form of timekeeping was shared. Entire communities recognized the same signals. There was little room for individual variation. When the season changed, life changed collectively. Importantly, seasons were not fixed lengths. Some years brought longer rains, others ended early. Agricultural societies adapted to this variability. Time was understood as responsive, not rigid. Because of this flexibility, early calendars were descriptive rather than prescriptive. They described what was happening, rather than dictating what should happen. The land led, people followed. This seasonal awareness allowed communities to survive without precise measurement. It also reinforced patience. Seasons could not be hurried. Waiting became part of life. Seasonal time did not move forward endlessly. It returned. Each year repeated familiar patterns, even as details changed. This repetition gave time a circular quality. The future was not unknown. It resembled the past. In this way, the seasons formed humanity's earliest sense of long-term time. They connected memory, expectation, and action into a continuous rhythm that required no numbers to function. Within each day, light provided structure. Before artificial lighting, daylight defined activity. The rising sun signaled beginning. The fading light signaled closure. Early agricultural societies did not divide the day into equal parts. Morning, midday, and evening were understood through changes in light and temperature. These divisions were fluid and adjusted naturally across the seasons. In the morning, cooler temperatures allowed for heavier labor. As the sun climbed, work slowed or shifted. Midday heat encouraged rest or lighter tasks. Evening brought preparation for night. This pattern required no clocks. The body responded instinctively to light. Fatigue, hunger, and alertness followed natural rhythms. In Anatolia, long summer days extended work periods. Short winter days condensed them. People adapted without complaint or resistance. There was no expectation of consistency. In Mesopotamia, daylight was equally central. Markets operated during light hours. Craft production followed visibility. Darkness limited activity naturally. Daylight created boundaries. Work ended when light failed. This boundary protected rest. It prevented endless labor. Importantly, daylight-based time was communal. Everyone experienced the same light. The same sunrise and sunset applied to all. This shared structure reduced conflict. There was no disagreement about when the day began or ended. Light decided. By relying on daylight, early societies maintained a balanced relationship with time. Activity expanded and contracted naturally. Effort was limited by conditions, not demands. This alignment with light supported long-term sustainability. Exhaustion was less common. Rest was unavoidable. Daylight did not need to be measured. It needed to be noticed, and noticing was enough. Work in early agricultural societies followed rhythm, not schedule. Tasks were repeated daily, but not timed precisely. The focus was on completion, not duration. Fields were worked until conditions changed. Tools were used until fatigue set in. There was no pressure to maintain a constant pace. This rhythm allowed work to align with physical capacity. When energy was high, effort increased. When energy faded, activity slowed. In both Anatolia and Mesopotamia, this approach reduced strain. Agricultural labor was demanding, but it was not relentless. Natural pauses were built into the day. Without hours, productivity was not measured. Success was judged by outcome, not efficiency. Crops grew or they did not. Harvests succeeded or failed. This removed abstract pressure. There was no race against time, only cooperation with it. Work rhythms were shared. Groups labored together. Breaks occurred together. This collective pace strengthened social bonds. Importantly, work did not define identity through time spent. There was no concept of working longer to achieve more value. Contribution mattered more than duration. This relationship with work supported mental balance. Anxiety about time loss was absent. Effort was present-focused. Work rhythms were learned early and repeated throughout life. They did not change rapidly. Stability reduced uncertainty. Without hours, time did not fragment the day. Life unfolded smoothly, guided by visible and felt signals rather than numerical pressure. Early agricultural societies experienced time through repetition. Days resembled one another. Seasons returned predictably. Change was gradual. This repetition created familiarity. Life did not feel rushed forward. It moved in cycles. Measurement was unnecessary. Knowing that something would return was enough. In this context, time did not accumulate as loss. It renewed itself. Repetition reduced anxiety. The future was not unknown. It had been lived before. This cyclical understanding shaped expectations. Innovation was slow. Stability was valued. Time was trusted because it repeated. Time was shared. Communities moved together. Work, rest, and ritual followed common rhythms. There were no private schedules. Individual variation was minimal. This reduced conflict. Time belonged to the group. Collective time reinforced belonging. Life was synchronized. Isolation was rare. Togetherness was constant. Urgency did not define life. Speed was not valued. Waiting was normal. Delays were expected. Time was allowed to unfold. This absence of urgency supported patience and endurance. Life moved at the pace of nature. As attention to time deepened, people began to look upward. The sun and moon offered consistency. In the next section, we follow this shift. Time moves from land to sky. As early agricultural societies became more settled, their attention slowly shifted upward. The land remained central, but it was no longer the only source of guidance. Above the fields, above the rivers and hills, the sky offered something the ground could not: consistency. While weather could change unexpectedly, the movements of the sun and the moon returned again and again in familiar ways. These repeated patterns invited observation. Over time, people learned that the sky could be trusted. This shift did not happen suddenly. It was not the result of a single discovery. It emerged gradually, through daily life. People noticed where the sun rose and where it set. They noticed how its path changed across the year. They noticed that nights grew longer or shorter, and that these changes aligned with shifts in temperature and growth. Looking up became part of paying attention. In Anatolia and Mesopotamia, wide horizons made the sky especially visible. Early settlements were not surrounded by tall structures. The sky dominated the landscape. Its movements were impossible to ignore. Unlike the land, the sky did not need to be worked. It did not resist. It only moved, and it moved in ways that repeated. This repetition mattered. For communities whose survival depended on timing, repetition created reliability. If the sun returned to the same place after many months, then time itself could be anticipated. Importantly, this observation did not require abstraction. People did not think in terms of angles or calculations. They thought in terms of position and change. The sun was higher, the days were longer, the mornings felt different. These perceptions formed the earliest sky-based understanding of time. The sky also offered distance. While the land was immediate and demanding, the sky was untouchable. It allowed observation without interference. This distance gave the sky authority. It could not be altered by human action. Because of this, celestial movement began to feel larger than daily life. It framed existence rather than participating in it. This framing allowed time to be understood as something shared beyond the local environment. Even when fields differed or rivers flooded unpredictably, the sky remained common. Everyone saw the same sun. Everyone experienced the same phases of the moon. Time, through the sky, became collective knowledge. In Mesopotamia, this collective observation was especially important. River cycles were complex and sometimes destructive. Watching the sky offered an additional layer of predictability. Seasonal flooding aligned with changes in daylight and celestial position. The sky helped make sense of uncertainty on the ground. In Anatolia, where agriculture relied heavily on rainfall and temperature, the sky provided reminders of seasonal approach. Subtle shifts in sunrise and sunset signaled coming change before it arrived in the fields. This did not create control. Early societies did not believe they could command time. Instead, observation fostered alignment. Actions were adjusted to match what the sky suggested. Looking up became a habit, not a ritual yet, and not a science, but a shared practice of attention. Over generations, this practice deepened. Knowledge was passed down not through numbers, but through memory. Elders remembered where the sun stood during successful harvests. They remembered the moon's shape during certain rituals. These memories guided future decisions. The sky, in this way, became a guide without instruction. It did not tell people what to do. It showed them what was happening. And by watching carefully, early societies learned to move with time rather than against it. This moment marks a quiet transition. Time begins to lift away from the ground. It is no longer only felt through soil and labor. It is now also seen, slowly and reliably, across the sky. In the next section, this attention will focus more closely on the sun itself, its path, its changing height, and the way it shapes the year. As attention to the sky deepened, the sun became the most important reference point. Its movement was slow, predictable, and impossible to miss. Unlike weather or river levels, the sun followed a path that returned again and again. Early agricultural societies did not describe this path mathematically. They experienced it visually. The sun rose from different points along the horizon throughout the year. It climbed higher in the sky during some seasons and remained low during others. These changes were gradual, but they were consistent. Over time, people noticed that these shifts shaped the year. Longer days brought warmth and growth. Shorter days brought cold and limitation. The sun's height influenced temperature, plant development, and animal behavior. By observing its path, communities learned to anticipate seasonal change before it fully arrived. This awareness gave the year a shape. In Anatolia, where climate variations could be sharp, the sun's changing position provided early signals. A higher sun meant longer workdays and faster growth. A lower sun meant preparation for scarcity. The sun's movement offered a way to understand not just the present season, but the direction in which the year was moving. In Mesopotamia, the sun's role was equally significant. Although rivers defined agricultural life, the sun structured daily and seasonal labor. Irrigation schedules, planting periods, and maintenance work aligned with daylight length and heat. The sun did not divide the year into equal segments. Instead, it created phases. These phases were not counted. They were recognized. People understood that the year expanded and contracted. Summer days stretched. Winter days compressed. Time itself seemed to change speed depending on the season. This experience shaped how early societies understood continuity. The year was not a straight line moving forward. It was a cycle that widened and narrowed. The sun's path also made repetition visible. Each year, the sun returned to familiar positions. These returns confirmed memory. What had happened before would happen again. This repetition did not eliminate uncertainty, but it softened it. While exact outcomes could not be predicted, the general pattern remained stable. Importantly, this understanding did not produce urgency. Knowing that the sun would return reduced anxiety. There was time to prepare. There was time to wait. The sun's movement also connected daily experience with long-term awareness. A single sunrise belonged to a much larger pattern. Each day participated in the year as a whole. This connection helped communities situate themselves within time. Life did not feel isolated. It felt embedded. The sun offered a rhythm that required no intervention. It did not respond to human action. It continued regardless of success or failure. This independence gave it authority. Because of this, the sun gradually became more than a practical guide. It became a symbol of order, not imposed order, but natural order. Yet at this stage, the sun was still primarily observed, not worshipped. Its role was functional. It explained change. It did not demand interpretation beyond what could be seen. Early societies did not ask why the sun moved as it did. They asked what its movement meant for life. The answer was simple and profound. It shaped the year. As the sun's path became familiar, time extended beyond immediate experience. People began to think not only in days, but in seasons. The future gained structure. This shift prepared the way for a deeper engagement with the sky. While the sun shaped the year, another presence would soon offer a different rhythm, one that moved more quickly and visibly. In the next section, attention turns to the moon and to the shorter, repeating cycles that began to define time within the year. While the sun shaped the broad structure of the year, the moon introduced a different experience of time. Its movement was faster, more visible, and more intimate. Unlike the sun's gradual seasonal shift, the moon changed noticeably from night to night. This change invited attention. Early agricultural societies did not need instruments to follow the moon. Its phases were clear to anyone who looked up regularly. The moon appeared, grew brighter, reached fullness, and slowly faded. Then the cycle began again. This repetition created a shorter rhythm within the year. The moon's cycle offered something new, a sense of time passing that could be observed within a single human lifespan, even within a single month. While the sun marked long transitions, the moon marked return. In Anatolia and Mesopotamia, this regularity became meaningful. People noticed that certain activities aligned well with particular phases. Nights with a full moon allowed extended work, travel, or gathering. Darker nights encouraged rest and stillness. The moon influenced how night was used. This influence did not require explanation. It was practical. More light meant more possibility. Less light meant limitation. The moon shaped behavior simply by changing visibility. Over time, the moon's phases also became associated with agricultural awareness. Planting, harvesting, and animal behavior were observed in relation to lunar cycles. Whether these associations were always accurate mattered less than the consistency with which they were remembered. The moon became a reference point. Unlike the sun, which was often experienced as distant and overwhelming, the moon felt closer. It moved through the night sky in a way that felt accessible. Its shape changed visibly. Its presence varied. This variability made the moon a companion to human time. In Mesopotamia, where written records would later appear, early attention to lunar cycles laid the groundwork for future calendar systems. But long before writing, lunar observation functioned through memory and shared knowledge. Communities remembered when the moon returned to fullness. They recognized its absence. They expected its reappearance. This expectation structured time without counting. The moon also introduced anticipation. Unlike the sun, whose daily movement was subtle, the moon's transformation could be noticed quickly. Each night brought a change. This gave time texture. It was no longer only seasonal, it became layered. Within the year shaped by the sun, the moon created smaller repeating units. These units were not numbered, they were experienced. Importantly, lunar time was communal. Everyone saw the same moon. Its phases were shared. This reinforced collective rhythm. The moon also bridged day and night. While the sun governed daylight, the moon softened the transition into darkness. It made night less absolute. This softened relationship with night influenced how rest and activity were balanced. Some nights extended life gently, others encouraged withdrawal. The moon did not impose order, it offered suggestion. Early societies did not seek to master this rhythm, they followed it loosely. The moon's cycle was reliable enough to be useful, but flexible enough to adapt. This balance mattered. Time remained something to observe, not something to control. As lunar awareness deepened, it complemented solar observation. Together, the sun and moon provided a layered understanding of time, long cycles and short ones, broad structure and gentle repetition. This combination allowed communities to orient themselves within the year without abstraction. Time was visible, shared, and responsive. In the next section, we return to the land, focusing on how these celestial rhythms were interpreted locally, shaped by geography, climate, and regional experience, particularly in Anatolia. In Anatolia, time was read through the land as much as through the sky. The region's varied geography, plateaus, valleys, mountains, and plains, created subtle but reliable seasonal markers. These markers did not require measurement, they required attention. Early communities learned to recognize change through patterns that repeated each year. Snow melted from higher ground. Winds shifted direction. Certain plants appeared, while others faded. Animals altered their movement and behavior. These changes were not random. They followed sequences that could be remembered. Seasonal markers in Anatolia were local. While the sun and moon were shared by all, the land spoke differently in different places. A valley responded to spring before a plateau. A coastal area felt seasonal change differently than an inland settlement. This meant that time was both universal and specific. Communities learned their own landscapes intimately. Knowledge of when to plant or prepare was tied to place. One village's timing could not simply be copied by another. Time had to be read locally. In this context, seasonal markers became forms of practical memory. Elders remembered when frosts ended. They remembered how long rains usually lasted. They remembered which signs preceded a successful harvest. This memory was not written. It was repeated. Children learned by observing adults. Tasks began when familiar signs appeared. Work paused when signs disappeared. Over generations, this repetition created stability. Seasonal time in Anatolia was adaptive. Some years followed expectations closely. Others did not. When variation occurred, communities adjusted. Time was not rigid. It allowed response. This adaptability reduced fear. While outcomes could not be guaranteed, the process remained familiar. The land itself acted as a guide. Soil texture changed with moisture. Color shifted as growth progressed. Smell even played a role. These sensory cues grounded time in physical experience. Seasonal markers also shaped social life. Certain periods invited communal work. Others encouraged gathering or rest. Life followed the rhythm of the land rather than external demands. Importantly, these markers did not isolate people from the sky. Instead, they connected celestial observation with earthly experience. A change in the sun's path aligned with changes in vegetation. The moon's phases coincided with activity patterns. Time was understood as layered. In Anatolia, this layering created resilience. Communities did not rely on a single signal. They observed many. If one failed, others remained. This redundancy made time knowledge durable. Seasonal markers also reinforced patience. Change unfolded gradually. There was no sudden beginning or ending. Seasons arrived slowly and departed the same way. This slowness shaped expectation. Life was not rushed toward milestones. It flowed through phases. The absence of precise boundaries reduced pressure. People did not wait for a specific day. They waited for readiness. Readiness was sensed, not calculated. This approach allowed time to remain humane. It responded to the body, the land, and the sky together. Seasonal markers in Anatolia illustrate how time functioned before abstraction. It was embedded in environment. It was shared through memory. It adapted to variation. Time did not demand attention. It invited it. As we move forward, attention shifts from land-based markers to water-based ones. In Mesopotamia, rivers introduced a different kind of seasonal time, one shaped by movement and flow rather than gradual change. In the next section, we explore how river cycles define time along the Tigris and Euphrates. In Mesopotamia, time was shaped by water. While the sun and moon offered stability in the sky, the rivers introduced movement on the ground. The Tigris and the Euphrates did not remain still. They rose, overflowed, receded, and shifted. This movement defined life. Early agricultural societies along these rivers learned that time could not be understood without flow. Flooding was not an interruption. It was expected. Each year, the rivers expanded beyond their banks, covering fields with water and sediment. When the water retreated, it left behind fertile soil. This cycle made agriculture possible, but it also demanded attention. Floods arrived neither randomly nor precisely. Their timing varied from year to year. Communities learned to anticipate them, but not to control them. This uncertainty shaped Mesopotamian time awareness. Unlike the gradual seasonal markers of Anatolia, river cycles introduced urgency without speed. Preparation mattered, but haste did not help. People watched the rivers closely. Changes in current, color, and sound carried meaning. Rising water signaled transition. Receding water signaled opportunity. River time was dynamic. Fields could not be planted until the waters withdrew. Canals had to be maintained before flooding began. Storage and planning depended on knowing when water would arrive. This made time relational. It existed between river and land, between anticipation and response. In Mesopotamia, river cycles connected celestial observation with earthly reality. The timing of floods often aligned with seasonal changes marked by the sun. Daylight length and temperature offered clues about approaching river behavior. The sky and the rivers spoke together. Because river behavior affected entire regions, time became collective. Flooding did not impact one household alone. It reshaped whole landscapes. Communities prepared together and adapted together. This shared experience reinforced communal memory. Stories of past floods informed present decisions. Knowledge was carried forward through experience rather than instruction. River cycles also introduced risk. Floods could nourish, but they could also destroy. Fields could be lost. Homes could be damaged. This uncertainty deepened respect for time. Time was not only about growth, it was also about restraint. In response, Mesopotamian societies developed early forms of water management. Canals, levees, and drainage systems required coordination and long-term planning. These systems were built in anticipation of future cycles. This planning did not impose rigid schedules. It reflected awareness. People prepared because time had taught them to expect return. River time also influenced ritual life. Flood seasons were marked by offerings and communal activities. These rituals did not aim to stop flooding. They acknowledged dependence. Acknowledgement was central. Time, like the rivers, was powerful and beyond control. Unlike later mechanical timekeeping, river-based time remained responsive. Each year required renewed attention. Past experience guided action, but certainty was never complete. This balance between knowledge and uncertainty shaped Mesopotamian life deeply. It fostered humility. It encouraged cooperation. It grounded time in lived reality. River cycles reminded communities that time moved. It flowed. It could not be fixed in place. Yet even in this movement, patterns emerged. Floods returned. Fertility followed. Life continued. Time in Mesopotamia was not counted. It was endured, prepared for, and shared. As we move to the next section, attention shifts from natural cycles to human response. Celestial and environmental rhythms did more than guide labor. They shaped meaning. In the next part, we explore how ritual time emerged, how the repetition of natural cycles was mirrored in sacred order and communal ceremony. As early societies observed the repeated movements of the sun, the moon, and the natural world, these patterns began to take on meaning beyond survival. Time was no longer only something that guided labor, it also shaped belief. This shift did not happen suddenly. Ritual time emerged slowly as repetition became familiar and dependable. When certain moments returned reliably, they invited recognition. Recognition led to gathering. Gathering led to ritual. In Anatolia and Mesopotamia, ritual time did not interrupt daily life. It grew from it. Celestial patterns provided the framework. The return of longer days, the appearance of a full moon, or the arrival of seasonal transitions became moments marked by communal attention. These moments were not chosen arbitrarily. They were anchored in observation. Rituals aligned with what could be seen. The sky offered order. Its movements suggested continuity beyond individual lives. This sense of order created reassurance. If the sun returned each year, then life followed a larger rhythm. Ritual acknowledged this rhythm. Importantly, ritual time was repetitive. It returned as the sky returned. This repetition strengthened memory. People knew when to expect certain gatherings, even without written calendars. Ritual time was not measured, it was anticipated. In Mesopotamia, Temples played a central role in organizing ritual time. These spaces did not control time. They reflected it. Offerings, ceremonies, and communal pauses aligned with celestial and seasonal signals. The purpose was not prediction, it was alignment. Rituals marked moments of transition. They acknowledged beginnings and endings that were already occurring. By doing so, they helped communities move through change together. In Anatolia, ritual practices were often tied closely to land and season. Harvest periods, preparation phases, and moments of scarcity carried symbolic weight. Ritual did not separate sacred from practical life. It connected them. This connection softened uncertainty. When outcomes were unclear, ritual provided structure. It did not promise control. It offered continuity. Ritual time also created pauses. Certain days or periods were set apart. Work slowed or stopped. These pauses were not seen as loss of productivity. They were necessary moments of balance. The sky reinforced this rhythm. Just as night followed day, rest followed effort. Ritual mirrored natural alternation. Importantly, ritual time was collective. Participation mattered more than precision. Being present was more important than arriving at a specific moment. This collective experience strengthened social cohesion. Shared rituals synchronized emotion, memory, and expectation. Ritual time also carried authority. Because it aligned with celestial order, it felt larger than individual choice. This authority did not oppress. It reassured. Time, through ritual, gained meaning beyond function. Yet ritual did not dominate life. It remained periodic, not constant. Most of time was still ordinary. This balance prevented ritual from becoming burden. Ritual moments stood out precisely because they were rare. Through ritual, early societies expressed respect for time rather than ownership of it. They did not claim mastery. They acknowledged dependence. Celestial order provided a model. The sky moved without regard for human activity. Ritual followed rather than attempted to lead. This attitude preserved humility. Time was seen as something to live within, not to overcome. As ritual time became established, it shaped how communities understood their place in the world. Life felt connected to something stable and repeating. In the next section, we move away from ritual and return to structure. We examine how, despite this deep alignment with natural rhythms, early societies began to feel the need to describe time more precisely, not to replace observation, but to support coordination. Time will slowly begin to shift from being only observed to being gently counted. In early agricultural societies, time was not expressed through numbers. There were no fixed units, no standardized divisions, and no abstract measurements. Yet time was understood clearly. This understanding did not come from calculation. It came from pattern. Patterns were everywhere. The sun returned to familiar positions. The moon repeated its phases. Seasons followed one another in recognizable sequences. Rivers rose and fell. Work and rest alternated. These repetitions created orientation without counting. People did not need to know how many days had passed. They needed to know what was happening again. Recognition mattered more than precision. Familiarity mattered more than accuracy. Time was learned through exposure. By living within repeating patterns, early societies developed an intuitive sense of duration. They knew how long something usually took, not because it was measured, but because it had happened before. Memory replaced measurement. This kind of time did not move forward in identical steps. It moved in waves. Some periods felt long, others passed quickly. Variation was accepted. Because of this, time remained flexible. Patterns allowed adjustment. If something arrived earlier or later than expected, it did not break the system. The system was designed to absorb variation. Numbers, by contrast, demand consistency. Patterns allow difference. In Anatolia and Mesopotamia, this pattern-based understanding of time supported resilience. Agricultural life depended on many variables beyond human control. A system built on exact measurement would have failed often. A system built on observation could adapt. Patterns also encourage patience. When time is counted, delay feels like loss. When time is patterned, delay feels like part of repetition. Something may come later, but it will still come. This reduced urgency. Without numbers, there was no constant comparison between what was planned and what was achieved. There was only alignment or misalignment with familiar rhythms. Life did not feel behind schedule. Patterns also shaped expectation. People did not expect each day to be different. They expected similarity with gradual change. This expectation reduced anxiety about the future. The future was not unknown territory. It resembled the past. Importantly, pattern-based time was shared. Everyone recognized the same signs. Everyone learned the same sequences. Knowledge did not belong to specialists. It belonged to the community. This shared understanding strengthened cohesion. Disagreement about timing was rare. Patterns were visible to all. Because time was not quantified, it was not owned. No one controlled it. No one managed it. It existed independently. This independence preserved balance. Time could not be exploited. It could only be followed. Pattern-based time also shaped memory. Events were remembered in relation to cycles, not dates. Something happened during harvest, or before the floods, or when the moon was full. These references were meaningful because they were embodied. They connected memory to lived experience. Without numbers, time remained close to the body. It was felt in fatigue, hunger, readiness, and rest. These sensations provided guidance. Time did not need explanation. It was lived. This way of understanding time did not prevent complexity. It supported it. Patterns overlapped. Seasonal rhythms combined with lunar cycles. Daily light intersected with ritual moments. Time was layered, not divided. Only much later would numbers begin to appear, not to replace patterns, but to assist coordination. But before that shift, time functioned fully without abstraction. In this earlier world, time did not demand constant attention. It asked for awareness, and awareness was enough. In early agricultural societies, time was not private. It did not belong to individuals, households, or leaders. It belonged to everyone. This shared relationship with time emerged naturally from shared observation. The sun rose for all. The moon changed for all. The seasons arrived for all. Because these signals were visible and undeniable, time became common knowledge. No one needed to announce it. No one needed to enforce it. People observed together. Fields were worked side by side. Harvests were gathered collectively. Rest followed labor as a group. Through this shared activity, time was learned socially. Children absorbed timing, not through instruction, but through participation. Knowledge of time was embedded in daily life. When to begin planting, when to pause work, when to prepare for cold or heat, these decisions were rarely debated. They were recognized. Agreement emerged through shared experience rather than authority. This collective understanding reduced conflict. Time did not divide people. it synchronized them. In Anatolia, village life reinforced this synchronization. Communities were small, daily routines were visible. When one household adjusted, others followed. Timing was reinforced through imitation. In Mesopotamia, larger populations required coordination. River cycles affected entire regions. Shared observation allowed communities to act together without formal schedules. When water rose, everyone noticed. When it receded, everyone responded. Time knowledge was not centralized. It was distributed. Elders played an important role, but not as controllers. They acted as memory keepers. They remembered past cycles and shared those memories through stories and practice. Their authority came from experience, not command. This form of knowledge was resilient. It did not disappear if one person was lost. It lived in the group. Shared observation also made time stable. When many people recognized the same pattern, confidence increased. Uncertainty was faced together. Failure was shared, not individualized. This communal approach softened risk. Agricultural life involved constant uncertainty. Weather, pests, and floods could disrupt expectations. Facing these disruptions collectively reduced fear. Time was not something one could fall behind on alone. Shared time also shaped emotion. Anticipation, relief, and rest were experienced together. Rituals amplified this. When a familiar moment arrived, it was acknowledged as a group. This shared emotional rhythm strengthened bonds. Life felt coordinated rather than fragmented. Importantly, shared observation limited the emergence of control. When time belongs to everyone, it cannot easily be claimed by anyone. There was no advantage in owning time. There was no benefit in speeding it up. Time remained neutral. This neutrality preserved balance. Effort was measured by contribution, not by speed. Waiting was acceptable. Delays were tolerated. Shared observation also encouraged humility. No one could see the future alone. Understanding came from listening to others and to the environment. Time knowledge was dialogic. It emerged from conversation with land, sky, and community. Because of this, time remained close to lived reality. It was not abstracted into symbols or systems. It was present in gesture, routine, and memory. This closeness made time forgiving. Mistakes did not break the structure. Learning continued. Shared observation represents a mature stage in early time awareness. It shows that complex coordination is possible without measurement. It demonstrates that time can function as a social bond rather than a constraint. In these societies, time was not something people used. It was something they lived together. By observing the sky, early agricultural societies gained a broad and steady sense of time. The movements of the sun and the moon provided structure without force. They did not dictate action. They framed it. Over time, this framing became familiar. Celestial patterns no longer demanded attention. They became background knowledge. The sky continued to move, and people continued to notice. But the act of noticing softened. Time settled. The sun's path no longer needed constant watching. Its presence was assumed. The lengthening and shortening of days were felt rather than measured. The moon's phases were recognized instinctively, without conscious tracking. Celestial time became internal. This internalization marked an important shift. Time was no longer something people actively observed each day. It became something they carried. The sky had taught its lessons, and those lessons were absorbed into routine. As a result, daily life required less attention to the heavens. Work began when light allowed it. Rest followed when darkness arrived. Preparation aligned with familiar seasonal expectations. The sky remained present, but it was no longer foreground. This did not mean that celestial time lost importance. It meant that it had succeeded. Its patterns were reliable enough to fade into normalcy. When time functions smoothly, it becomes quiet. In Anatolia, this quiet integration allowed communities to focus more fully on immediate life. Tasks were performed without calculation. Decisions were made without constant reference. The sky's rhythm lived within habit. In Mesopotamia, where environmental complexity demanded awareness, celestial time still guided expectation. But even there, it became part of practical knowledge rather than conscious observation. Time was no longer learned each day. It was remembered. This memory-based relationship reduced cognitive strain. People did not need to interpret signs constantly. They responded automatically to familiar conditions. This automatic response created continuity. Life moved forward smoothly. Disruptions were noticeable precisely because they broke familiarity. Celestial time also influenced perception of pace. When time is not counted, it does not hurry. Days expanded and contracted naturally. Long summer days felt generous. Short winter days felt contained. This variability was accepted. Acceptance mattered. Without fixed units, there was no expectation of uniformity. Life adapted to difference rather than resisting it. As celestial time settled into daily life, it supported balance. Effort alternated with rest. Activity followed limitation. Excess was restrained by darkness, cold, or fatigue. This balance protected communities from exhaustion. It allowed recovery. It preserved health. Time did not need to be managed. It managed itself. The quiet success of celestial time prepared the ground for something else. When time no longer needed constant observation, attention shifted inward, toward the details of daily existence. People became more aware of how time was felt within work, rest, and social interaction. Time was no longer only above or around them. It was within their actions. This inward turn did not reject the sky. It built upon it. Celestial rhythms remained the foundation, but life began to unfold more fully at ground level, within homes, fields, workshops, and communal spaces. Time moved from being something watched to something lived. Without measurement, without numbers, without division, time entered the texture of ordinary life. It shaped habits, expectations, and relationships. By this stage, time no longer needed explanation. It had become self-evident. Life followed its rhythm naturally, and in that natural following, daily existence found its pace. In early agricultural societies, waking did not require instruction. There was no signal to obey, no device to consult, no precise moment that marked the beginning of the day. Morning arrived gradually, and waking followed the same pattern. Light changed first. Before the sun appeared, the darkness softened. The air shifted. Sounds returned slowly. Birds moved. Animals stirred. These subtle changes preceded consciousness. The body responded before the mind needed to decide. Waking was not an action, it was a response. Without clocks, there was no single correct time to rise. People woke when the environment allowed it. In warmer seasons, this happened earlier. In colder seasons, later. The body adjusted naturally to these variations. Sleep was not interrupted, it was completed. In Anatolia, morning light filtered differently depending on geography. In valleys, light arrived later. On open plains, it came earlier. Homes were built with this in mind. Doorways, openings, and orientation shaped how morning entered living space. Waking followed architecture as much as sunlight. In Mesopotamia, where temperatures rose quickly, early waking aligned with comfort. Rising before the heat allowed work to begin gently. Morning was valued not because it was early, but because it was usable. This usability mattered more than consistency. Without clocks, there was no expectation that waking should happen at the same moment each day. Regularity came from repetition, not precision. People woke when it felt like morning. This feeling was learned. Children observed adults. They learned when life began to move. They learned when sound returned to the village. Over time, waking became communal. When others rose, the day had begun. Morning was shared. This shared waking reduced isolation. No one began the day alone. The transition from sleep to activity happened together, quietly. Importantly, there was no urgency in waking. Nothing was missed by rising slowly. Tasks waited. Light remained. The day did not punish delay. This absence of urgency shaped mental calm. There was no fear of being late. There was no pressure to align with an external standard. Time did not judge. Waking without a clock also preserved rest. When the body needed more sleep, it took it. Fatigue was respected. There was no reason to override it. This respect mattered in physically demanding lives. Agricultural labor required strength and endurance. Rest was part of preparation, not an obstacle to productivity. Morning did not begin with alertness. It began with presence. People moved slowly at first. Water was fetched, fires were tended, animals were checked. These actions did not require haste. They bridged sleep and work gently. This gradual transition protected the body. It allowed the mind to adjust. The day unfolded without sharp boundaries. Without clocks, waking did not separate night and day abruptly. Darkness faded. Light grew. Activity followed. This continuity reduced stress. There was no sudden demand for attention. Awareness returned at its own pace. In this context, morning did not represent obligation. It represented opportunity. The day was open, not scheduled. Waking was not preparation for tasks. It was re-entry into life. This way of beginning the day shaped everything that followed. Work, rest, and social interaction all carried the same softness. Time did not push forward. It opened. By waking without a clock, early societies allowed the body to remain aligned with the environment. The transition from sleep to activity was natural, collective, and calm. The day began not because it was time to begin, but because it was possible to begin. In early agricultural societies, the morning was not defined by a schedule. It was defined by energy. The body rested from the night, responded to the cool air and growing light with readiness. Work began not because a certain hour had arrived, but because strength was available. Morning energy was physical. After waking, movement came naturally. Muscles were rested. The air was cooler. Breathing was easier. These conditions shaped the kind of work that was done first. Tasks requiring strength or focus were preferred during the morning hours. This choice was not strategic in a modern sense. It was intuitive. In Anatolia, Early morning was often the most comfortable time for outdoor labor. Fields were tended before the sun grew intense. Animals were moved while the ground remained cool. Water was carried before heat added strain. In Mesopotamia, where temperatures rose quickly, the morning held particular importance. Work that required sustained effort was completed early. As the day warmed, activity shifted or slowed. Morning work followed the body's natural rhythm. There was no separation between physical awareness and labor. People felt when they were capable and acted accordingly. When energy was high, work progressed. When it began to fade, tasks changed. This responsiveness prevented exhaustion. It allowed effort to be effective rather than excessive. Importantly, morning work was not rushed. There was no pressure to complete as much as possible in a fixed time. The goal was alignment, not efficiency. Work continued as long as conditions supported it. Because there were no deadlines, progress was measured differently. Completion mattered more than speed. Tasks unfolded steadily. There was no sense of falling behind. Morning energy was shared. Communities worked together. The pace of one influenced the pace of others. If someone slowed, the group adjusted. Cooperation replaced competition. This shared rhythm strengthened social bonds. Labor was not isolating. It was communal. Morning also offered clarity. The mind, rested from sleep, was alert. Decisions were made easily. Planning happened organically through conversation and observation. There was no rush to decide everything at once. Adjustments were made as the day unfolded. Morning work did not dominate the entire day. It set the tone. Effort began gently and increased naturally. The day warmed gradually, and work followed that progression. This gradual increase protected balance. Energy was spent carefully. There was no sudden demand for full exertion. Without clocks, morning did not end abruptly. There was no fixed boundary between morning and midday. As heat increased and light shifted, work naturally changed. Some tasks slowed, others paused. Rest became acceptable. Morning energy was not something to exploit, it was something to use wisely. This wisdom was learned through experience. Over time, communities recognized the limits of the body. Ignoring fatigue led to harm. Respecting it led to sustainability. Because of this, work remained humane. Morning labor was also integrated into daily life. It was not separated from social interaction. Conversations happened alongside work. Observation continued. Time did not fragment experience. Work, awareness, and relationship coexisted. The absence of a clock allowed this integration. Nothing forced separation. Nothing demanded acceleration. Morning work flowed from waking naturally. It did not require motivation or discipline. It required presence. As the day progressed, energy shifted. Heat increased. Attention softened. Activity adjusted. This adjustment did not feel like interruption. It felt like continuation. Morning energy had been used. The day moved forward. As the morning progressed, the environment began to change. The air warmed. Shadows shortened. Light grew stronger. This shift did not announce itself sharply. It arrived gradually, and with it came a natural slowing of life. In early agricultural societies, midday was not treated as a challenge to overcome. It was treated as a condition to respond to. Heat altered the body's capacity. Movement required more effort. Concentration softened. Breathing became heavier. These sensations were not ignored. They were accepted. Without clocks, there was no expectation that work should continue at the same pace throughout the day. When conditions changed, behavior changed with them. Midday did not demand productivity, it encouraged moderation. In Anatolia, where summer heat could be intense, midday often marked a pause. Outdoor labor slowed. Tasks shifted indoors or into shade. Activities requiring less exertion replaced heavier work. In Mesopotamia, where heat could rise quickly and remain intense, this slowing was even more pronounced. Continuing heavy labor during peak heat was neither efficient nor safe. Communities learned to protect themselves by adapting their rhythm. This adaptation did not require rules. It was learned through experience. Midday heat acted as a boundary, not a rigid one, but a felt one. When the sun reached its highest point, effort naturally declined. This decline was not viewed as weakness. It was understood as wisdom. Life adjusted its pace. People rested. They sat. They waited. Silence increased. Conversations softened. The environment itself seemed quieter. Animals sought shade. Movement slowed across the landscape. The entire community participated in this pause. Importantly, this slowing was shared. No one felt compelled to continue while others rested. There was no pressure to appear active. Time allowed rest. Without deadlines, there was no loss in slowing down. Tasks could resume later. The day was not divided into equal demands. It unfolded according to conditions. This flexibility reduced strain. It preserved energy for when it was most effective. Midday also offered mental rest. With physical effort reduced, attention turned inward. Observation replaced action. People became aware of their surroundings without engaging them. This awareness did not feel idle, it felt necessary. Rest was not separate from work. It was part of it. The absence of clocks meant there was no fixed duration for this slowing. It lasted as long as the heat required. When conditions eased, activity returned naturally. No signal was needed. Midday heat taught patience. It reminded communities that time was not constant. The day contained different qualities. Each quality required a different response. This understanding prevented resistance. Instead of pushing against conditions, people moved with them. Life remained balanced. Midday also reinforced the value of shade, shelter, and shared space. Architecture responded to this need. Thick walls, small openings, and interior courtyards offered relief. Homes became places of quiet during peak heat. This relationship between environment and time shaped daily life deeply. The slowing of midday did not disrupt the day. It gave it structure. Morning effort was balanced by midday rest. Energy was conserved for later activity. This rhythm protected endurance. It allowed life to continue over long seasons without exhaustion. Midday did not end the day. It marked a transition. As heat gradually softened and shadows lengthened again, life would begin to move forward once more. But in this moment, time rested, and resting was enough. In early agricultural societies, work existed without deadlines. Tasks were not assigned to fixed points in time. There were no dates to meet, and no moments that carried penalty for delay. Work progressed according to readiness, conditions, and collective rhythm. This absence of deadlines shaped how effort was experienced. Without a deadline, work did not carry pressure, it carried purpose. Tasks needed to be done, but they did not need to be rushed. Completion mattered more than timing. Fields were tended when soil allowed it. Repairs were made when materials and energy were available. Preparation unfolded gradually. This approach did not mean disorganization, it meant flexibility. People understood which tasks were important and which could wait. This understanding came from experience, not instruction. Over time, priorities became intuitive. Urgency was reserved for necessity, not imposed by schedule. In Anatolia, agricultural cycles created natural limits. Planting could not be delayed indefinitely, but it also could not be forced. The land determined the window. Within that window, work moved steadily. In Mesopotamia, where river behavior added uncertainty, flexibility was essential. Floods could alter plans suddenly. A rigid schedule would have failed. Work adapted. Without deadlines, failure did not feel like falling behind. It felt like responding to change. This reduced anxiety. People did not measure themselves against time. They measured themselves against need. Work was not fragmented into units. It was continuous. One task flowed into another without sharp boundaries. When effort paused, it resumed later. There was no sense of interruption. Because time was not counted, there was no competition between tasks. Nothing needed to be prioritized artificially. The most necessary work simply became visible. Work without deadlines also supported cooperation. Without individual schedules, tasks were shared. People assisted where help was needed. Coordination happened through presence rather than planning. This collective approach reduced isolation. Labor was social. Importantly, the absence of deadlines protected rest. When the body required pause, it was taken. Work waited. There was no penalty for stopping. This balance preserved health. Physical labor was demanding, but it was not relentless. Without deadlines, productivity was not maximized. It was sustained. Sustainability mattered more than speed. Agricultural life depended on endurance over long seasons. Burning out early served no one. Work without deadlines also shaped identity. People were not defined by how much they completed in a given time. They were defined by participation and reliability. Time did not measure worth. This prevented hierarchy based on speed or efficiency. Contribution was valued in many forms. The environment reinforced this mindset. Natural conditions changed unpredictably. Flexibility was rewarded. Rigid timing was punished. Over generations, this relationship with work became normalized. Children learned that effort was important, but urgency was not constant. They learned patience by watching adults wait. Waiting was not seen as wasted time. It was part of the process. This way of working fostered calm. Even when tasks were many, life did not feel compressed. Time expanded to meet need. Work existed within time, not against it. In the absence of deadlines, time did not threaten. It supported. And because work was not chasing time, it remained grounded in the present moment. In early agricultural societies, rest was not separate from life. It was not something earned after work, nor something postponed until the end of the day. Rest existed alongside effort, woven into the rhythm of daily activity. Without clocks, there was no strict division between working time and resting time. The day was not segmented into opposing categories. Instead, it moved through states of intensity and ease. Rest emerged naturally. When energy declined, activity softened. When heat increased, movement slowed. When attention faded, silence followed. These transitions did not require permission. They were accepted responses to changing conditions. Rest was not interpreted as inactivity. It was understood as adjustment. In Anatolia, rest often took the form of stillness rather than sleep. People sat in shade. They observed. They waited. This waiting was not empty. It allowed recovery without withdrawal from the world. In Mesopotamia, where environmental conditions could be demanding, rest was essential for survival. Ignoring fatigue could lead to injury or illness. Respecting it preserved strength. Rest was therefore practical, not indulgent. Importantly, rest was shared. Communities slowed together. When one person paused, others did as well. There was no expectation to remain active while others rested. This shared rest reduced pressure. No one felt the need to justify stopping. Time allowed rest. Rest also supported attention. When the body paused, awareness expanded. People noticed their surroundings without acting on them. This awareness reinforced connection to place. Rest became a form of observation. Because rest was not scheduled, its duration varied. Sometimes it was brief, sometimes it extended. There was no correct length. The body decided. This flexibility preserved balance. It prevented rest from becoming another task to complete. Rest also reinforced the body's authority. Sensation guided behavior. Fatigue was not ignored. Comfort mattered. In this context, rest was not passive. It actively maintained capacity for work. Without deadlines, there was no urgency to resume activity prematurely. Work waited until readiness returned. This waiting did not create anxiety. It created trust. Trust in the body. Trust in time. Rest was also integrated into social life. Conversation often happened during pauses. Stories were shared. Silence was comfortable. These moments strengthened community bonds. Importantly, rest did not diminish productivity. It sustained it. Agricultural work required endurance across long seasons. Rest protected that endurance. Life was not designed around constant output. It was designed around continuation. Rest as part of the day also influenced sleep later. Because energy was managed throughout the day, exhaustion was less extreme. Night rest became deeper and more restorative. The body was not depleted by constant strain. This integration of rest reduced extremes. There were fewer sharp transitions. The day flowed smoothly from effort to ease and back again. Time supported this flow. Rest did not mark failure or weakness. It marked awareness. In early societies, knowing when to stop was as important as knowing when to act. This knowledge was learned collectively and reinforced daily. Rest belonged to time as much as work did. They were not opposites. They were partners. And together they shaped a life that moved forward without force. In early agricultural societies, time was rarely experienced alone. Life unfolded in proximity to others, and this closeness shaped how time was felt. Social presence was not scheduled. It emerged naturally from shared routines and shared spaces. Without clocks, there was no need to arrange meetings or coordinate availability. People were present together because their lives followed the same rhythm. Work, rest, and movement happened in view of one another. Time was social by default. Daily tasks brought people into contact. Fields were worked side by side. Tools were shared. Animals were tended collectively. Even rest often occurred in communal spaces or within sight of others. This constant presence created a shared sense of pacing. When activity increased, it increased together. When it slowed collectively. Social time did not require intention. It was a consequence of living closely. In Anatolia, village layouts supported this togetherness. Homes clustered around shared areas. Movement through the village was visible. The rhythm of one household influenced others. In Mesopotamia, larger settlements still preserved this visibility. Markets, canals, and communal worksites created regular interaction. Time awareness was reinforced through observation of others. When people around you slowed, you slowed. When they gathered, you gathered. This synchronization reduced friction. There was little conflict over timing because time was experienced similarly by all. Individual variation existed, but it did not dominate. Social presence softened the sense of passing time. When attention was shared, time felt fuller. Moments did not feel empty or wasted. Conversation emerged without planning. Silence was comfortable. Presence mattered more than productivity. Importantly, social time did not compete with work. It accompanied it. Talking while working, resting together, or simply being near others did not interrupt activity. It enriched it. Time was not divided into productive and social segments. These aspects overlapped. This overlap supported emotional balance. Life did not feel fragmented. Identity was not split between roles. People were workers, family members, and community members simultaneously. Shared presence also provided regulation. When someone struggled, others noticed. When someone needed rest, it was visible. Support did not require request. Time allowed care. Social time also shaped memory. Events were remembered collectively. Stories were told and retold. Time gained meaning through shared narrative. This narrative did not rely on dates. It relied on moments. Something happened during a harvest, or during a long summer, or when the rains were late. These references were meaningful because they were shared. Social presence also reduced loneliness. Even quiet moments were rarely isolated. Being alone did not mean being disconnected. This constant connection influenced how people related to time. Time did not feel like something passing away individually. It was experienced together. Because of this, there was less anxiety about missing out. Life was happening in the open. Nothing important happened elsewhere. Shared presence grounded people in the present. Attention remained close to what was happening now. Without schedules, there was no anticipation of future obligations. Without clocks, there was no awareness of time slipping away. Time felt abundant. Social time did not demand engagement. Participation was natural. Being present was enough. This ease preserved energy. It allowed relationships to exist without effort. In early agricultural societies, time was not something to manage socially. It was something that connected people automatically. Shared presence did not fill time. It revealed it. Time was not empty. It was occupied by life, quietly unfolding among others. As the day moved toward evening, change arrived gently. Light softened. Shadows lengthened. Colors deepened. The intensity of the day slowly released its hold. This transition did not demand attention. It unfolded naturally, and life adjusted with it. In early agricultural societies, evening was not a moment. It was a process. Work did not stop abruptly. It eased. Tasks became fewer, movements slowed, voices softened. The body responded to the changing light without instruction. Evening light signaled closure without force. In Anatolia, the angle of the sun transformed familiar landscapes. Hills darkened first, valleys followed. The cooling air encouraged stillness. Activity shifted closer to home. The day turned inward. In Mesopotamia, where heat often lingered, evening brought relief. As temperatures dropped, movement became comfortable again, but energy was no longer directed toward heavy labor. The day had already given what it could. Evening was not for effort, it was for return. People gathered what was left undone and carried it forward mentally without urgency. There was no need to complete everything before night. Darkness would arrive regardless. This certainty removed pressure. The end of the day was inevitable and accepted. Without clocks, there was no precise end time. Closure happened gradually. Tasks finished when light no longer supported them. Visibility set the boundary. Evening light created a natural limit. It did not judge. It simply faded. This fading encouraged reflection. The mind shifted from action to awareness. The day's events were not reviewed deliberately. They settled on their own. Evening did not demand preparation for the next day. There was no schedule to consider. Tomorrow would arrive when it arrived. This absence of anticipation preserved calm. Evening activities were simple. Fires were tended. Food was prepared. Animals were secured. These actions were familiar and repetitive. They required little decision-making. Repetition brought comfort. Social presence continued, but without intensity. Conversations slowed. Silence became natural. Being together did not require engagement. Evening allowed closeness without effort. Architecture supported this transition. Thick walls held warmth. Interior spaces offered enclosure. Light sources were limited and gentle. The environment guided behavior. Artificial light did not extend the day. It softened its ending. This limitation mattered. Without strong lighting, the body received clear signals. Activity was not prolonged artificially. Rest approached naturally. Evening light also reshaped perception of time. The day did not feel cut short. It felt complete. There was enough time for what mattered. What remained undone did not carry urgency. It belonged to another day. Closure was not forced. It was felt. This feeling of completion did not require achievement. It came from participation. Having been present was enough. Evening also protected boundaries between day and night. There was no overlap. Darkness was allowed to arrive fully. This clarity supported deep rest later. The body recognized the transition. The mind followed. Evening did not end life. It concluded the day gently. Time did not collapse into night. It flowed into it. By allowing the day to close gradually, early societies preserved balance. There was no struggle against ending. There was no attempt to extend activity beyond its natural limit. Evening light marked a release. Effort gave way to ease. Attention softened. The day rested. And in that resting, time prepared itself quietly for night. In early agricultural societies, sleep was not planned. It was not scheduled, delayed, or summoned. Sleep arrived when the day released its hold, and people followed it without resistance. There was no concept of a proper time to sleep. There was only readiness. As evening settled and light diminished, the body responded. Muscles softened, attention narrowed, speech slowed. These changes were not interpreted, they were felt. Sleep was not something to prepare for, it was something to enter. Without clocks, there was no awareness of being early or late. There was no comparison between one night and another. Sleep did not compete with productivity. It completed the day. In Anatolia, night arrived fully once light faded. Artificial illumination was limited and weak. Fires and small lamps offered warmth and orientation, not extension of activity. Darkness was allowed to exist. This darkness mattered. It signaled safety. It marked enclosure. It reduced stimulation. The environment guided the body gently toward rest. In Mesopotamia, night brought relief from heat and labor. The cooling air encouraged stillness. Movement became unnecessary. The body no longer needed to respond to external demands. Sleep followed naturally. Importantly, sleep was not solitary. Families rested near one another. Sounds of breathing, shifting, and quiet presence filled the space. These sounds were not distractions. They were reassurance. Sleep was shared. This shared rest reduced vigilance. The environment felt secure. There was no need to remain alert. Trust replaced tension. Sleep was not interrupted by obligation. There were no alarms, no reminders, no anticipation of an exact waking moment. The night belonged to itself. This absence of anticipation deepened rest. The mind did not hover between states. It let go. Sleep did not represent escape. It represented continuation. The day had unfolded fully. Nothing remained unresolved. Whatever was unfinished belonged to another cycle. This acceptance was essential. Without deadlines, without schedules, there was no pressure to carry the day forward into the night. Sleep was allowed to be complete. The body entered rest gradually. There was no sudden collapse. Awareness faded gently. Thoughts slowed and dissolved. This gradual descent protected depth of sleep. The transition was smooth. The nervous system did not need to adjust abruptly. Sleep was restorative because it was unforced. Night sounds continued. Wind moved. Animals shifted. Fire settled into embers. These sounds did not disturb. They marked continuity. The world did not disappear during sleep. It quieted. Because sleep was natural and expected, fear was minimal. Darkness was not hostile. It was familiar. It arrived every day. Sleep did not isolate individuals from time. It returned them to its rhythm. Hours were not counted. Duration was not measured. Sleep lasted as long as it needed to. When rest was sufficient, waking would come naturally, as it had before. This trust in sleep preserved balance. The body was not pushed beyond its limits. The mind was not kept alert unnecessarily. Sleep was respected. In early agricultural societies, sleep was not an interruption in life. It was a passage. A movement from one state to another, from effort to stillness, from presence to release. Time did not stop during sleep. It softened, and within that softness, life continued quietly, preparing itself for another day without needing to be called. In early agricultural societies, time was not only practical, it was also meaningful. As daily rhythms stabilized and celestial patterns became familiar, people began to recognize certain moments as different from others. These moments did not interrupt ordinary life. They emerged from it. Sacred time did not replace daily time. It rested within it. Ritual did not appear as an abstract system. It grew from repetition. When certain events returned reliably, harvests, floods, seasonal transitions, they invited acknowledgement. Acknowledgement gradually became ceremony. This process was quiet and gradual. In Anatolia and Mesopotamia, ritual time was anchored in observation. The sky, the land, and the seasons provided cues. Ritual moments aligned with what was already happening. They did not impose new timing. They followed existing rhythms. Sacred time was therefore recognizable. It felt appropriate rather than enforced. Rituals often marked transitions, the beginning of planting, the completion of harvest, the arrival of seasonal change. These were not moments chosen arbitrarily. They were moments when life shifted direction. Ritual offered a way to pause together. In Mesopotamia, temples played a central role in this process. They were not only places of worship, they were points of temporal organization. Activities within temples followed cycles tied to celestial observation and environmental change. Offerings, gatherings, and periods of rest aligned with recurring patterns. These actions did not aim to control time. They acknowledged dependence on it. In Anatolia, sacred practices were often closely connected to land and community. Seasonal work carried symbolic meaning. Ritual did not separate the sacred from the practical. It connected them. This connection reduced uncertainty. When outcomes were unclear, ritual provided continuity. It reminded communities that they were part of a larger pattern. Sacred time also introduced intentional pauses. Certain days or periods were set apart. Work slowed or stopped. These pauses were not losses. They were restorations. Rest during sacred time was collective. Everyone participated. No one was left behind. This shared pause reinforced social cohesion. Ritual time did not demand precision. Participation mattered more than exact timing. Being present was more important than arriving at a specific moment. This flexibility preserved calm. Sacred time also shaped memory. Ritual moments stood out. They created markers within the year that did not rely on numbers. People remembered life through these shared moments. Something happened during the harvest festival, or after the floods, or when the days began to lengthen again. These references were meaningful because they were lived together. Importantly, sacred time did not dominate daily life. It remained periodic. Most of time was still ordinary. This balance prevented ritual from becoming burden. Sacred moments were powerful precisely because they were rare. Ritual also reflected humility. Early societies did not believe they controlled time. Sacred practices acknowledged forces beyond human influence. The sky moved regardless of human effort. Rivers flowed without permission. Ritual did not resist this reality. It accepted it. This acceptance reduced anxiety. Time was not an adversary. It was something to live within. Sacred time also reinforced continuity across generations. Rituals were repeated. Children learned them by participation. Knowledge passed quietly from one generation to the next. This repetition gave time depth. Life did not feel isolated within a single lifetime. It felt connected to what came before and what would come again. Ritual time did not accelerate history. It slowed it. By returning again and again to familiar moments, sacred time softened the passage of years. Change occurred, but it was framed by repetition. Time did not rush forward, it circled gently. In early agricultural societies, sacred time was not a separate calendar. It was an attitude, a way of recognizing that some moments deserved attention, pause, and shared presence. These moments did not ask to be measured, they asked to be acknowledged, and through that acknowledgement, time gained meaning without losing calm. Night arrived without announcement. There was no signal, no moment of transition that demanded attention. Darkness spread gradually, and life followed it without resistance. In early agricultural societies, night was not an extension of the day. It was a different state of being. Activity did not continue into darkness by force. It dissolved into stillness. The absence of clocks mattered most at night. Without artificial light and without timekeeping devices, night imposed its own rhythm. Visibility faded, movement slowed, sound softened. The world reduced itself naturally. This reduction was not feared, it was expected. In Anatolia, night transformed the landscape completely. Familiar paths disappeared into shadow. The horizon dissolved. The land that guided activity during the day released its hold. People returned inward. In Mesopotamia, night offered relief. After long exposure to heat and labour, darkness cooled the air and quieted the environment. The body responded with release. Night did not invite productivity. It invited rest. Without clocks, there was no pressure to remain awake, no awareness of lost hours, no calculation of how much sleep was needed. Rest unfolded according to need. Sleep was not commanded. It arrived. Before sleep, there was stillness. Fires dimmed. Lamps were few and weak. Light did not dominate the space. It marked presence gently, without extending activity. Conversation slowed or ceased. Silence was not awkward. It was appropriate. Night sounds replaced daytime noise. Wind, insects, distant animals. These sounds did not disturb rest. They confirmed continuity. The world did not stop at night. It softened. In this softness, vigilance decreased. There was no reason to remain alert. Trust replaced control. Communities rested, knowing that night was shared. Sleep was collective. People slept near one another. The presence of others provided reassurance. Breathing, shifting, and quiet sounds formed a shared rhythm. This shared rest reduced anxiety. The night did not isolate individuals. It held them together. Importantly, night did not demand uniformity. Some slept earlier, some later, some woke briefly and returned to rest. There was no correct pattern. Time did not judge these variations. Without clocks, waking during the night did not carry meaning. There was no awareness of how long one had slept or how much remained. Thought did not fixate on duration. The mind remained quiet. Night also allowed memory to settle. The day's experiences did not require review. They dissolved naturally. There was no pressure to reflect or plan. The absence of anticipation mattered. Without knowing when morning would arrive, the mind did not lean forward. It rested fully in the present darkness. This deepened rest. Sleep was not framed as recovery from exhaustion alone. It was a continuation of life in a quieter form. The body remained connected to environment, but without demand. Time moved differently at night. It slowed, not because it was measured differently, but because attention withdrew. This withdrawal was essential. In early societies, night preserved balance. It limited activity naturally. It prevented overextension. It protected health without instruction. Night did not need to be respected deliberately. It enforced respect by existing. The absence of clocks ensured that night remained intact. Without measurement, there was no temptation to shorten rest or extend wakefulness unnecessarily. Darkness set the boundary. This boundary supported deep sleep. The nervous system was not overstimulated. The mind did not hover between states. Sleep was allowed to complete itself. Night also reinforced humility. In darkness, human control diminished. The environment took precedence. This surrender was not frightening. It was familiar. People did not attempt to dominate the night. They accepted it. This acceptance reduced fear of the unknown. Night arrived every day. It had always returned. Trust was built through repetition. Night was not empty time. It was full of rest. As hours passed uncounted, the body adjusted. Breathing slowed, muscles released, consciousness faded. Time did not disappear. It became gentle. Eventually, without effort or expectation, sleep deepened fully. There was no sense of crossing a threshold. Awareness simply withdrew. The absence of clocks allowed this withdrawal to be complete. Night held the body until morning returned on its own terms. And when morning came, it would arrive as it always had, not as an interruption, but as a gradual return. But for now, night remained. Still, unmeasured, sufficient. For a long time, time did not need to be measured. It was observed, followed, and trusted. Daily life, seasonal change, and night rest functioned without numbers. Yet as communities grew larger and activities became more complex, attention slowly turned toward coordination. This shift was not sudden. It did not replace earlier ways of understanding time. It added to them. The first attempts to measure time did not emerge from curiosity alone. They arose from practical needs. As settlements expanded, shared activities required clearer reference points. Rituals needed alignment. Labor required coordination. Exchange depended on timing. Measurement appeared quietly. Early methods did not aim for precision. They aimed for consistency. The sun provided the most obvious reference. Its movement was already familiar. Shadows changed predictably. By observing shadow length and direction, people could divide the day loosely into parts. These divisions were approximate. They varied with season and location. Accuracy was not the goal. Orientation was. Sundials, in their earliest forms, did not impose uniformity. They reflected variability. Longer shadows in winter, shorter shadows in summer. Time remained connected to environment. In Mesopotamia, where administrative complexity increased early, such methods supported organization. Markets, rituals, and public work benefited from shared reference points. Knowing roughly when an activity should begin or end reduced uncertainty. Still, these measures did not dominate daily life. They supplemented observation. Measurement also appeared in ritual contexts. Certain ceremonies aligned with repeated celestial events. Marking these moments helped preserve continuity. Ritual time gained structure without losing meaning. Importantly, early measurement did not divide time into equal units. There were no identical hours. There was no insistence on uniform duration. Time remained flexible. Numbers were introduced cautiously. This caution mattered. A rigid system would have conflicted with lived experience. Agricultural life depended on variation. Measurement had to adapt to reality rather than reshape it. Because of this, early timekeeping remained embedded in natural cycles. It did not abstract time away from environment. It described what was already happening. Measurement did not erase pattern. It named it. The emergence of time measurement also reflected a change in memory. As societies grew, shared memory alone became less sufficient. Recording and marking time supported continuity across generations. Yet even with these developments, time did not become dominant. It did not dictate behavior. It assisted coordination. Daily life continued to follow light, energy, and condition. Night still arrived unmeasured. Sleep still followed readiness. Measurement existed alongside unmeasured time. This coexistence is important. Early societies did not experience a sudden transformation from lived time to counted time. The two overlapped for a long period. People could measure time when necessary and ignore it when not. This balance preserved calm. Measurement did not introduce urgency immediately. It introduced reference. Knowing roughly where one was within the day or year helped planning without creating pressure. Only later would time measurement become precise, standardized, and external. Only later would it begin to command rather than assist. At this stage, measurement remained modest. Time was still something people lived within, not something they served. The first attempts to measure time did not aim to control life. They aimed to support it. They respected the rhythms already in place. Measurement followed observation, not the other way around. This order mattered. Because time had been understood deeply before it was measured, early systems retained flexibility. They did not demand obedience. They offered guidance. In this sense, early timekeeping was an extension of attention rather than a replacement for it. Time remained humane. As measurement slowly entered daily life, it did not erase rest, ritual, or night. These remained intact. Measurement occupied only certain moments. Most of life continued uncounted. The day still opened naturally. Work still adjusted to energy. Evening still closed gently. Night still belonged to darkness. Measurement touched time lightly. This light touch allowed societies to grow without losing balance. It allowed coordination without domination. Time did not accelerate. It remained steady. The first attempts to measure time represent a subtle shift, not a rupture. They mark the beginning of description, not command. Time began to be named but not yet owned, and because it was not owned, it did not yet hurry life forward. Time remained patient. Time did not always move as it does now. For most of human history, it did not rush forward. It did not fragment itself into units. It did not demand attention. It simply existed. In the lands of Anatolia and Mesopotamia, time was not something people checked. It was something they noticed. The light changed. The air cooled. The land responded. The body followed. Nothing needed to be counted for life to continue. Time unfolded through repetition, through return, through familiarity. Days did not compete with one another. Nights were not shortened. Rest was not negotiated. Life moved within time, not against it. As we have seen, early societies did not separate time from experience. They did not abstract it away from land, sky, or body. They did not remove it from daily life and place it elsewhere. Time remained close. It lived in the length of shadows, in the pause at midday, in the quiet of evening, in the depth of night. Even when time began to be measured, it was done gently. Measurement did not erase trust. It did not replace observation. It simply added reference where needed. Most of life remained unmeasured. This balance mattered. Because time was not constantly counted, it did not feel scarce. Because it was not divided endlessly, it did not feel fragmented. Because it was not owned, it did not feel lost. Time belonged to everyone equally. It passed through work and rest without judgment. It allowed waiting. It allowed repetition. It allowed return. Nothing had to be optimized. In this older relationship with time, the day did not ask to be completed. It asked to be lived. When the day ended, it ended fully. Nothing remained pending. Nothing followed into the night. Sleep arrived without resistance. Night held the world quietly, and morning returned when it was ready. This rhythm did not promise ease. Life was still demanding. Labor was still heavy. Uncertainty remained. But time itself was not an added burden. It did not hurry people forward. It did not stand over them. It accompanied them. Listening to this older rhythm now may feel unfamiliar, not because it was unnatural, but because it was once so natural. Time did not need to be managed to be meaningful. It did not need to be controlled to be trusted. It only needed attention. As this exploration comes to rest, there is nothing to remember, nothing to carry forward deliberately. The patterns remain whether they are named or not. The body still responds to light. The mind still quiets at night. Rest still restores without instruction. Time still knows how to slow down, and when it does not announce itself. It simply becomes quiet. If you are listening while resting, there is nothing more to do. The day does not need review. The night does not need preparation. Time is already holding you, not as something measured, not as something counted, but as something lived. And in that living, time remains patient, still, sufficient, unrushed.